Hey guys. Tonight, the air smells faintly of salt and olive oil drifting from a flickering hearth in a cramped stone kitchen. A single flame licks the edge of a clay pot, where something brown and questionable bubbles with a hiss. You hear sandals scrape across dusty floors, the hum of cicadas bleeding through the open window, and the low groan of an amphora being tilted. Somewhere, someone curses the heat. Before we begin, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. You sit there in the golden haze of a Greek evening, watching a man crush olives with a flat stone, his hands slick with oil that glistens like honey but smells faintly rancid. The walls sweat with the day's heat. A loaf of bread as hard as a roof tile rests beside a bowl of watery wine. This, believe it or not, was dinner for most people in ancient Greece. Tonight, we'll wander through the smoky kitchens and sun-baked markets of the ancient world to uncover why ancient Greek food was truly awful. You'll learn what they ate, how they cooked it, and why even the gods on Mount Olympus might have gone hungry if they'd been born human. So, settle in, let the crickets hum, and prepare to taste history, one dry loaf at a time. The first thing you notice is the dryness. The earth beneath your sandals crumbles like stale bread, pale and cracked from months without rain. Wind drags dust across your ankles, carrying the faint scent of thyme and goat droppings. You glance toward the horizon. Rocky hills roll endlessly into the haze, dotted with olive trees that look as if they've been alive since Zeus himself learned to throw lightning. This was the pantry of ancient Greece: rock, heat, and hope. The soil here wasn't generous. It was thin, stubborn, and easily offended by rain or neglect. Farmers scratched at it with wooden plows, hoping for barley, olives, and grapes, the holy trinity of survival. You can almost hear the creak of the plow, the grunt of oxen, and the resigned sigh of a man who knows the earth will give only what it absolutely must. Wheat, too demanding. Rice? Never heard of it. Greece was a land for the humble and the hungry. When you look closer, you realize how this shaped everything. The gods were imagined feasting in abundance because mortals never could. A good harvest meant barley bread instead of acorns, and wine diluted less with water. Every crumb was a victory against the landscape. The Greeks didn't worship food, they negotiated with it, one harvest at a time. You feel the sun pressing against your neck, relentless and impersonal. Farmers wiped their brows with tunics stiffened by salt. Their lives revolved around patience, waiting for rain, for the grain to rise, for the olive press to stop squealing. Hunger was a familiar ghost, sitting quietly at the edge of every meal, reminding them that comfort was for the gods, not men. At dawn, you'd see women kneading barley dough beside smoking hearths. The dough was rough and coarse, mixed with ash, seeds, and crushed lentils. It clung to their fingers like wet clay. When baked, it came out dense enough to bruise a jaw. Still, they ate it with gratitude. It wasn't good bread, but it was bread. The smell of burning chaff and damp flour fills your senses. You watch as a woman sets her loaf on a flat stone near the fire, the crust blackening within minutes. The room is small, full of smoke, and the only ventilation is the doorway, where a chicken wanders in, unimpressed. You realize that every bite of Greek food began in a haze of sweat, soot, and resignation. Even the wealthy couldn't escape the landscape. They simply masked it with ceremony. Feasts featured olives and figs arranged like treasure on bronze platters. But they were the same ingredients, just cleaner and in better bowls. Whether you were a shepherd or a poet, you chewed the same dust. The difference was presentation, not pleasure. You imagine sitting at one of these grand tables, men reclining, women serving, someone pouring watered wine. The conversation drifts around philosophy and politics, but the food sits heavy and plain. A philosopher might debate virtue between bites of lukewarm lentils, unaware that his meal would one day inspire centuries of dietitians claiming the Mediterranean diet was paradise, if only they could taste it. Soon, night falls. The smell of the hearth deepens, smoke, sweat, and sour wine. Outside, goats bleat into the distance, and the air cools slightly. You realize the food wasn't meant to delight, it was meant to endure. The Greeks didn't chase flavor, they chased survival. Every sip of wine, every olive pit spat into the dust, was an offering to endurance itself. If you close your eyes, you can almost feel it. The mixture of reverence and fatigue, the eternal balance between hunger and pride. To live here was to accept that the gods ate well, so you didn't have to. And tomorrow, when the sun rose again, the cycle of dry soil and stubborn crops would begin all over. Soon you'll see how this barren landscape shaped not only their diet, but their entire philosophy of moderation, restraint, and self-control. When food is scarce, you learn not to love it too much. You wake before dawn to the smell of smoke. It clings to everything, your hair, your clothes, the cracked pottery walls. The hearth sits in the center of the room, a shallow pit filled with glowing embers, surrounded by soot-stained stones. There's no chimney, no ventilation, just a hole in the roof that sighs smoke into the morning air. The Greeks cooked like they lived, with resourcefulness and a quiet tolerance for discomfort. A pot hangs above the coals, blackened from years of use. Inside, something simmers, a stew, maybe, though it's hard to tell. The ingredients blend into a greyish broth, lentils, onions, bits of barley, a splash of cheap wine. It smells earthy, faintly metallic. You can almost hear the slow bubble, like the breath of a sleeping animal. Meals like this could take hours, not because they required skill, but because fire was unpredictable. You picture a woman crouched beside the hearth, stirring the pot with a stick. Her back is bent, her eyes red from smoke. This is her morning, her afternoon, her life. There are no spices to brighten the flavor, no butter to smooth it out, just time, heat, and hope that the lentils soften before her patience runs out. The Greeks didn't separate their kitchens from their lives. The hearth was everything. Kitchen, heater, altar. Families gathered around it not for comfort, but necessity. The warmth kept the chill away in winter, and the bread somewhat edible. It was also where they offered bits of food to Hestia, goddess of the hearth, because without her blessing, dinner might not happen at all. You can smell the oil as it burns. Olive oil, of course, they're liquid gold, but not the silky kind you imagine drizzled on salads. This was thick, pungent, sometimes rancid from the heat. It spat and hissed in the fire, coating the walls with a permanent sheen. The Greeks used it for everything, cooking, lamps, even cleaning their skin. Imagine frying your meal in the same oil you rubbed on your body. Efficient, if not appetizing. Nearby, a boy crushes garlic with a stone, the sound sharp against the hum of the fire. He mixes it with cheese and herbs into a paste called moritum. It's the ancestor of every Mediterranean dip you've ever tasted, though less of a delight and more of a dare. The texture is gritty, the flavor biting, enough to make you question your life choices. Yet for them, it was luxury. As the sun rises higher, the kitchen becomes unbearable. The heat from the fire merges with the day's warmth until the air itself feels edible. You wipe sweat from your brow, and it stings your eyes with salt. Meals weren't moments of joy, they were acts of endurance. To eat well was to survive discomfort without complaint. Still, there's a quiet dignity in it. Every meal was handmade, deliberate. Bread was baked stone by stone, oil pressed, drop by drop. You feel the rhythm of generations who cooked not to impress, but to continue. The food wasn't good, but it was honest. Later that evening, when the fire dies and the air cools, you sit near the fading coals. The hearth hums softly, a living thing. Smoke lingers on your tongue, reminding you that every Greek meal began and ended in fire. Tomorrow, the same hands will stir the same pot, repeating the same quiet ritual. There's something peaceful in that, even if it tastes terrible. We'll return to this hearth soon, because from its ashes rose not just meals, but the entire rhythm of ancient Greek life, from festivals to philosophy, all born from the smoke of survival. You wake to the hollow thud of a wooden pestle against stone. Someone is grinding barley again. The sound is steady, almost rhythmic, echoing through the small courtyard like a heartbeat. A thin film of dust floats in the morning light, and you can smell the grain, dry, earthy, with a faint bitterness. This was the rhythm of every Greek morning. Grind, knead, bake, repeat. Bread wasn't a luxury, it was the law of survival. Barley was the main ingredient, not wheat. Wheat was too precious, too rare, too expensive. Barley was rougher, harder to chew, and it never rose quite right. When baked, it produced loaves dense enough to serve as both food and weapon. You imagine biting into one, your jaw aches before the first crunch. But hunger made philosophers out of everyone. If life was suffering, then at least dinner proved it. The process was exhausting. Women spent hours grinding grain with heavy stones, their backs bent, hands raw from friction. The powder stuck to their skin like chalk. Sometimes they added lentils or ground acorns when supplies ran low. You could taste the desperation in every bite. Still, when the bread finally came out of the fire, blackened, cracked, imperfect, it filled the house with a smell that meant life could go on one more day. You sit by the fire as the loaf cools, its crust hard as pottery. Someone breaks it with a knife, not their hands. Inside, it's grey and dense, with an aroma that's equal parts smoke and earth. They dip it in wine or olive oil just to make it chewable. You take a piece, soak it, and realize you're not eating for pleasure, you're eating around it. The bread symbolized virtue. In a world where luxury was frowned upon, a tough loaf was proof of moral strength. The Greeks believed indulgence weakened the spirit. So, they made sure their meals tested your patience and your jaw equally. You weren't supposed to enjoy it, you were supposed to endure it gracefully. Some philosophers even wrote about bread. Epicurus, the man who founded a school of pleasure, claimed that a simple barley cake and a cup of water could bring perfect happiness. You can't help but smirk. He clearly hadn't tried chewing one of these things sober. Still, his point stood. Simplicity was sacred, and so in their humble kitchens, Greeks baked philosophy right into their crust. At night, leftover loaves were left out for the gods or for the rats, whichever came first. You imagine a candle flickering over the table, casting long shadows over the hard bread. It looked holy, but it was just what was left. The gods, you suspect, would have preferred fruit. There was one kind of bread reserved for festivals, made with wheat, honey, and oil. For a few days a year, the poor tasted sweetness. It must have felt like eating sunlight after years of rain. That small miracle of softness probably inspired more gratitude than all the feasts of Olympus combined. You can almost hear the whisper of a mother telling her child to save crumbs for the morning, just in case. Every bite carried the memory of hunger, the echo of leaner years. Bread wasn't just food, it was fear turned solid. And yet, when dawn came, they'd start again. Grind, knead, bake. The endless ritual of survival, disguised as daily life. You start to understand that this wasn't just the story of Greek food, it was the story of human endurance, baked one loaf at a time. Soon, you'll see what happened when they tried to make things better, by boiling everything into one smoky, grey solution. The pot bubbles again, always the pot. It's the heartbeat of the Greek household, their slow, smoky attempt at comfort. You lean over it, catching the smell. Lentils, onions, a hint of garlic, maybe a bone if they were lucky. The air is humid with steam, and the fire crackles beneath, spitting small bursts of oil. This is the Greek idea of variety, different shades of beige in the same bowl. Their most common dish was called maza, a kind of porridge made from barley meal mixed with water, oil, or wine. Imagine eating wet sand that someone tried to convince you was bread. It filled the stomach but not the soul. You chew it, and it dissolves into a bland paste, leaving behind only the faint taste of smoke. Still, it kept farmers standing and soldiers marching. Soups were the same story. Lentils, chickpeas, or broad beans boiled until the pot resembled mud. No salt, no spices, just the taste of resignation. On special days, they'd add leeks or herbs. The result wasn't much different, only more colourful in disappointment. You can almost feel the texture, thick, gritty, slightly sour, clinging to your tongue like glue. To soften the blow, they'd pour wine into it, not a pairing, a remedy. Greek wine was strong, acidic, and often mixed with seawater. It didn't improve the food so much as distract from it. You take a sip and cough softly. It burns, but in a way that reminds you you're alive. Still, these dishes were the soul of the Greek kitchen. They required patience and endurance, the same virtues prized in their stories and philosophy. Every household had its pot, and every pot had its story of drought, of debt, of devotion. Some even said you could judge a family's fortune by how much steam escaped their stew. The poor ate theirs with wooden spoons. The rich used bronze or silver, but the taste didn't change. Luxury couldn't hide the flavor of scarcity. A philosopher once joked that in Athens, even hunger was democratic. Everyone tasted it, just at different prices. Occasionally, they'd toss in bits of meat, usually goat or fish bones, left over from a market. The smell of boiling fat mixed with onions filled the house, sharp and heavy. It clung to clothes, hair, and memories. If you were lucky enough to catch a piece of actual meat, it was usually tough and stringy. But it didn't matter. It meant today was better than yesterday. And yet, somehow, these stews carried comfort. The slow rhythm of stirring, the soft sound of bubbling, it was hypnotic. Families gathered around the pot, not because the food was delicious, but because it was shared. You realize that the warmth of the meal came less from flavor and more from presence. At night, when the fire dimmed, the pot would cool, crusting over with a skin of lentil paste. The smell lingered until morning. You can imagine waking up to that, the stale ghost of yesterday's dinner greeting you like an old friend. It wasn't appetizing, but it was familiar. And in a world where life changed little, familiarity was its own kind of feast. The Greeks didn't cook for taste, they cooked for rhythm, for routine. Food wasn't a celebration, it was a ceremony. Every spoonful a prayer, every meal a quiet confession that being alive, though uncomfortable, was still worth it. We'll return to that idea soon, because as the meals grow simpler, the culture around them grows richer. Somehow, from all this blandness, the Greeks built beauty. You walk through the narrow alleys of an ancient Greek port, the air thick with the smell of salt, smoke, and something faintly rotten. The sea is close, you can hear waves slapping against wooden boats, gulls circling above, their cries sharp against the morning haze. Fishmongers shout prices you can't afford. The tables before them glisten with scales, eyes, and fins. For the Greeks, fish was both a gift from Poseidon and a taunt from him. Most people couldn't dream of eating a whole fish. The price of a fresh catch could equal a day's wages. So, while the wealthy dined on red mullet and sea bream, the rest of Athens made do with scraps, salted anchovies, dried sardines, or fish heads boiled into grey broth. You can imagine the smell, pungent, briny, unrelenting. It clung to every breath, every cloth, every thought. Still, the Greeks adored fish, perhaps because it represented something unattainable. The poet Archestratus wrote entire poems about which fish tasted best in which season. His verses read like love letters to creatures most readers would never touch. The irony was delicious, even if the food wasn't. You picture a poor fisherman listening to those verses and shaking his head, knowing the poet had never gutted a sardine in his life. The fish markets were loud, almost theatrical. Vendors slapped octopus tentacles against the counters to tenderize them, sending droplets of seawater into the air. The floor was slick with scales and brine, the noise constant, a choir of bargaining, seagulls and sizzling grills. You feel the heat rising from the coals, mingling with the sharp tang of salt. It was chaos. But to the Greeks, it smelled like wealth. If you were poor, you might stretch a single salted fish across several days, a piece today, another tomorrow, and by the third day, it was gone, but the smell lingered as proof that you'd eaten like the upper class, if only for a moment. Even the poorest homes kept small clay jars of fish sauce, gyros, a fermented mixture of guts, salt, and sunlight. It was the ancestor of modern condiments, though you wouldn't dare put it near fries. The sauce was made by leaving fish intestines to rot in the sun until the liquid separated and could be poured off. The result was salty, tangy, and unforgettable. You can imagine a family adding a single drop to their stew, pretending it made the meal divine. The smell alone probably convinced them to eat faster. Wealthy Greeks turned fish into performance art. They'd host dinners just to show off exotic catches, eel from Lake Kopais, tuna from the Aegean, squid grilled in oil. The dishes gleamed under lamplight like treasure. Yet even then, the taste was often spoiled by overcooking or bad preservation. Freshness was a fantasy in a world without refrigeration. Even the elites ate more hope than flavor. Inland villages were less fortunate. Fish arrived salted, stiff, or nearly fossilized. People soaked it in water to soften it, but the result was still chewy and overly salty. You picture a farmer tearing at a strip of preserved mullet, jaw muscles tightening with every bite. The meal was simple, but the sea had travelled miles to meet him. By nightfall, the harbour quiets. The last boats drift home, and the smell of salt fades into the hum of crickets. Somewhere, a family finishes its meal in silence, bones piled in a bowl. Fish, even bad fish, was connection to the gods, the sea, and each other. It wasn't about taste anymore. It was about belonging to something vast and unpredictable. You realize that every bite of Greek life, even the smallest anchovy, carried both humility and ambition. They worshipped the sea, but they also feared it, because it gave and it took, and it always demanded a price. Soon, you'll see how they turn to another flavor to fill the void, the sour, the fermented, and the bitter, the tastes of survival. The first thing you notice in the market isn't sweetness, it's sharpness. The air stings with vinegar, garlic, and sour wine. Clay jars line the stalls, filled with pickled olives, capers, and onions floating in cloudy brine. Everything smells half rotten, half alive. You can almost taste the acidity on your tongue, the sting in your nose. To the Greeks, this wasn't unpleasant, it was protection. Pickling meant the difference between eating and starving. They pickled everything. Olives were soaked in salt for months, garlic in wine, onions in vinegar. These jars filled pantries like tiny promises against famine. Each one held a fragment of a future meal, preserved in sharpness. You imagine opening one after a long drought, the hiss of escaping air, the scent of survival. It might not taste good, but it tasted safe. The olive, their sacred fruit, was both salvation and torment. Fresh from the tree, it was too bitter to eat. You had to cure it, soak it, and wait, sometimes for weeks. Only then did it surrender its flavor. You bite one, and it's soft, salty, with a faint, metallic tang. Not delightful, but deeply human. It's the kind of taste you learn to respect, not love. Vinegar wasn't just for cooking, it was medicine, cleaner, and flavoring. Soldiers drank watered vinegar to quench thirst, claiming it made them stronger. Maybe it did, or maybe it just numbed them to the flavor of everything else. You can almost picture a hoplite raising a clay cup of sour wine, grimacing between swallows, pretending it was fine vintage. The Greeks didn't waste. Every part of the harvest had to last. When grapes spoiled, they became vinegar. When bread hardened, it was soaked and reused. When oil went rancid, it became lamp fuel. You realize this wasn't poverty, it was philosophy in action. Restraint wasn't just moral virtue, it was survival disguised as wisdom. Still, bitterness had its own poetry. The Greeks even associated it with balance, the harmony between sweet and sour, pleasure and pain. A philosopher might argue that the soul, like food, must be seasoned with both. You can almost hear him saying it while chewing something pickled, convincing himself it's profound. The smell of vinegar and herbs fills the air as you wander deeper into the market. A woman sells clay pots of preserved figs, dark, sticky, shimmering like amber. Finally, something sweet. But even here, the sweetness carries salt. The figs are packed in brine to survive the journey from farm to city. Every flavor in Greece came with compromise. By afternoon, the sun warms the jars, intensifying the smell. The market becomes a haze of sour heat and buzzing flies. You can almost feel the stickiness on your skin, the salt drying on your lips. Hunger sharpens your senses until everything, air, noise, light, tastes faintly of survival. At home, families mix vinegar with herbs and pour it over barley or vegetables. The aroma fills the room, acidic, tangy, strangely comforting. You sip a bit from the bowl, and it burns pleasantly in your throat. It's not delicious, but it feels honest, like truth distilled into flavor. As night falls, you sit under the olive tree outside, listening to cicadas drone like tired poets. You understand finally that Greek food wasn't designed to please, it was designed to persist. Bitterness was a teacher, not a punishment, and through it they learned patience, moderation, and endurance. Tomorrow they'll do it again. Grind, pickle, stir, repeat. But for now, the fire fades, the air cools, and you can rest, knowing that the ancient Greeks survived not through sweetness, but through their quiet tolerance for the bitter taste of life. The lamps flicker across marble walls, casting long, honey-colored shadows on polished floors. You smell olive oil burning in bronze bowls, its smoke sweet and heavy, curling toward painted ceilings. Musicians pluck lyres softly in the corner, while servants glide between couches, pouring wine that shines like diluted blood. Tonight, you're at a symposium, a dinner party for those who believed the gods personally admired their taste. The first course isn't a feast of meats or spices, it's olives. Rows of them, black and green, gleaming in shallow dishes. The wealthy Greeks adored displaying simplicity as if it were proof of discipline. They drizzle oil over their hands, pretending to enjoy its purity, while whispering about politics and poetry. You realize moderation was never about humility, it was theater. The bread is finer here, made from imported wheat. You feel it crumble gently between your fingers, softer than the barley stones of the poor, yet still dry. They dip it into honey and wine, savoring what commoners would never taste. A poet raises his cup and praises Dionysus, though his speech slurs halfway through. The wine is strong, the talk stronger, and soon laughter drowns out hunger. A slave brings roasted fish, glistening with oil. Its skin crackles under the knife, releasing a faint tang of sea and smoke. The rich chew slowly, pretending to contemplate philosophy when in truth they're counting how many eyes admire their plate. Even in elegance, the taste remains familiar: salt, oil, faint bitterness. Wealth didn't change flavor, it just bought better dishes. Between courses, guests toss small crumbs to the floor for the household gods. You can hear them hit the marble with faint clicks. Each crumb is both offering and excuse for waste. The irony tastes sharper than vinegar. Philosophers would later preach moderation, but here it feels like a game, gluttony wrapped in restraint. A servant fills your cup again, mixing wine with water from a silver jug. The balance is deliberate. Too little water was barbaric, too much was cowardly. Every ratio carried meaning. You take a sip and feel warmth bloom in your chest, slow and deliberate, like sunlight through stone. Around you, conversation drifts from politics to poetry to gossip about someone's olive grove. You glance toward the doorway. Outside, the smell of street stew lingers, drifting in from the poor quarter. Inside, laughter rises. Outside, smoke. The same ingredients, two different worlds. You can't help but notice how comfort always demands distance. The night thickens. Musicians play faster, and voices blur together like ripples on a wine-dark sea. Somewhere, a guest begins reciting verses about heroes and gods, but his words melt into the rhythm of clinking cups. The sound feels ancient, almost eternal. It's the echo of human vanity disguised as culture. By dawn, the guests will stumble home, their breath heavy with oil and pride. The servants will scrape bones into clay bowls, wash goblets in cold water, and start the next day's fasting. The cycle continues: indulgence tonight, restraint tomorrow. The Greeks called it balance. You might call it exhaustion. As the last lamp dies, you realize that for all their sophistication, the taste of the elite wasn't so different from everyone else's. The only real difference was who had to do the dishes. Morning in Athens begins with hunger. The streets hum with the sound of sandals and vendors shouting prices. You smell bread baking somewhere, sharp and comforting, but it's probably too expensive. Closer to you, a man sells fried dough, small, uneven pieces sizzling in oil so dark it's likely been reused a dozen times. The scent is intoxicating and faintly alarming. You watch as people crowd around the stand. The vendor scoops the fried bits onto clay shards. No plates, no ceremony. The dough is chewy, slightly sour, soaked in oil that drips down fingers. It's not good, but it's fast. The first street food of history wasn't about pleasure, it was survival between chores. A few stalls down, another man grills tiny fish on a flat stone. Smoke curls into your eyes. The sound of sizzling fills the air like applause. The fish are small enough to eat whole, bones, heads, everything. A worker pays with a single coin, bites one, and walks away chewing. It's salty, crunchy, and gone in 3 seconds. Lunch in the time it takes to sigh. The streets themselves smell like a recipe: ashes, sweat, goats, and fermented wine. You step carefully between puddles of yesterday's rain and spilled oil. A woman sells figs wrapped in leaves, her hands stained purple. She hums softly, her voice lost in the crowd. Somewhere, a donkey brays as if protesting the price of olives. In the poorer quarters, cooking happens in alleys. Pots sit over small fires made from broken furniture or reeds. You can hear the low bubble of stews, beans, herbs, whatever was cheapest that morning. The smell drifts through the streets, heavy and honest. This was democracy at its most literal. Everyone inhaled the same smoke. Sometimes, children linger near the richer homes, waiting for scraps. They watch servants dump leftovers into buckets, hoping to snatch a piece of fish or bread before it's gone. The servants pretend not to see. You can almost feel the quiet shame that clings to the air, thicker than the smell of oil, and yet there's energy here. The marketplace breathes life into the city, people shouting, trading, laughing despite everything. Food wasn't comfort, but it was connection. Even if it was burned, oversalted, or stale, it was shared. You realize that in ancient Greece, flavor mattered less than belonging. The sun climbs higher, and the heat turns the air syrupy. Vendors fan their fires. The smell of charred fish deepens. You wipe sweat from your neck, eyes half closed from smoke. Around you, life continues. Merchants bargaining, poets performing for coins, soldiers eating with greasy hands. Civilization, for all its marble temples, still depended on oil and hunger. By evening, the market empties. The ground is littered with olive pits, bones, and fragments of clay bowls. The fires cool to ash, leaving faint trails of smoke that rise into a violet sky. You can almost hear the city exhale. For all its grandeur, Athens still smelled of food, burned, salted, shared, forgotten. As you walk away, the last vendor packs his goods: leftover dough, stale bread, half a jar of olives. He looks tired but content. Tomorrow he'll light the same fire, sell the same bites, breathe the same smoke. You realize that this endless repetition, the daily ritual of hunger and hope, is what truly fed the Greeks. Soon, you'll wander inland, where food met faith, where people tried to please the gods with the same ingredients that barely pleased themselves. The temple courtyard smells of smoke and honey. You hear the faint buzz of bees, the crackle of burning fat, and the chant of priests echoing against marble walls. Incense curls into the morning air, mingling with the heavy scent of roasted meat. You realize, almost immediately, that most of the meat isn't for people, it's for the gods. In ancient Greece, worship meant feeding beings who never had to chew. You watch as men lead a goat toward the altar. Its hooves clack softly against the stone. The priest murmurs a prayer, the blade flashes, and the smoke rises thick and grey. The best parts, the thigh bones wrapped in fat, are burned as an offering. The smell is rich, almost sweet, but it fades before it reaches you. What's left, the organs and scraps, will feed the priests and, if there's enough, the crowd. To eat after a sacrifice wasn't gluttony, it was grace. People waited patiently as the gods took their share first. You can almost feel the tension, hunger pressing behind reverence. The smoke curls upward, and everyone pretends not to breathe too deeply, as if the smell itself were divine property. For most, these rituals were the only time they'd taste meat. The irony stings sharper than the incense. The gods feasted daily, mortals occasionally, and everyone called it balance. You can hear a child whisper to her mother, asking if Zeus ever gets full. The mother just smiles and tells her to eat before the priests change their minds. The meat, when it reaches you, is chewy and half-burned. You taste salt, ash, and faint sweetness from the fat. It's not delicious, but it's sacred, and that, somehow, makes it enough. Eating from the altar connected you to eternity, even if it left you hungry by nightfall. Nearby, women place baskets of barley cakes and honey on smaller shrines. Bees circle lazily above them, drawn to the sweetness. The cakes are simple, rough flour, oil, and a drizzle of honey, but they shimmer in the sun like offerings made of gold. You realize the Greeks understood beauty as something temporary, edible, and fleeting. The air grows thick with smoke as more sacrifices begin. Sheep bleat, fire pops, prayers blend into a low hum. The whole scene feels hypnotic. You imagine how the smell would drift across the city, part feast, part funeral. In a way, it was both. Even philosophy couldn't escape this hunger. Thinkers debated whether gods truly needed food, or if the rituals merely kept humans sane. Maybe both were true. After all, the world felt more manageable when every hunger had a ritual. As dusk approaches, the fires burn low. The marble gleams red from the setting sun. People leave with bellies half full and hearts slightly lighter. The gods, silent as ever, leave no thank you, only smoke. You watch it rise and disappear, and you can't help thinking that maybe the gods just liked the smell. The night settles, cool and quiet. Somewhere, a farmer saves a strip of burnt meat for tomorrow, a small miracle from the heavens. You realize that religion and hunger were never separate in Greece. They were two halves of the same prayer. The air in the symposium is thick with laughter and wine fumes. Bronze cups clink, and someone sings off-key about love and war. But before you sip, remember, no true Greek drinks wine straight. That was for barbarians. You pour yours carefully, 3 parts water, 1 part wine, the sacred ratio between pleasure and shame. The Greeks took drinking seriously. They built rituals around it, rules within rules. The host, called the symposiarch, decided the mix. Too weak, and you were mocked as timid, too strong, and you were accused of losing your virtue. You can almost hear the debate unfolding beside you, men arguing about ratios as if the fate of the universe depended on the dilution. The first sip burns lightly, then fades into something floral and sour. Greek wine was thick, unfiltered, and often flavored with resin or herbs. Some even added seawater to preserve it, which made every gulp taste faintly like punishment. Still, it was safer than water, which came from questionable wells and carried invisible dangers. The guests recline on couches, propped on one elbow, their fingers stained red. The laughter grows warmer as the room thickens with smoke and song. Philosophers discuss virtue while slowly abandoning it. You can smell sweat, oil, and spilled wine merging into one ancient perfume. In the corner, a servant fills cups from a large mixing bowl, the crater. It's the heart of the evening, the balance between chaos and control. You imagine the rhythmic motion: pour, stir, ladle, repeat. The sound of liquid sloshing is almost musical. Drunkenness, ironically, was a moral exercise. The goal was to flirt with it, not fall into it. To drink just enough to free your tongue, but not your dignity. The Greeks treated moderation like a sport, each sip a small victory against chaos. Sometimes the wine turned philosophical. Someone might muse that Dionysus, god of wine, lived in the space between logic and madness. You take another sip, and it makes sense. A few more, and it makes even more sense. The beauty of Greek drinking was that clarity and confusion shared the same cup. The poorer citizens, of course, drank differently. Their wine was sourer, often spoiled, mixed with water drawn from clay cisterns. You can imagine them at dusk, sharing a jug by the roadside, laughing over nothing. Their joy felt just as sacred as any noble's toast. By midnight, the laughter softens. Lamps burn low and conversation drifts toward the absurd. Someone tries to quote a poet and fails spectacularly. The air feels thick, lazy, forgiving. You sense that this, more than the food, more than the rituals, was the Greek secret. Finding peace in imperfection. When dawn creeps through the shutters, the room smells of ashes, oil, and drying wine. Cups lie overturned. Wreaths of ivy wilt on the floor. You take a last look at the crater, now empty. The Greeks would say it's a metaphor that all joy, like wine, must be shared and then forgotten. Outside, the morning feels clean again. The air tastes of dust and new sunlight. You smile faintly, thinking that maybe, just maybe, the gods invented hangovers as a reminder that moderation isn't just a virtue, it's survival. Morning sunlight spills over the hills, warm and golden, coating the world in honey tones that make everything look tastier than it actually is. You follow the sound of goats, their bells clinking softly, and the low voice of a shepherd calling them down the slope. The smell of grass, animal musk, and sour milk fills the air. Somewhere nearby, cheese is being born, not gracefully, but with effort and doubt. Greek cheese wasn't creamy or rich. It was hard, salty, and stubborn, more like a preserved memory than food. The shepherd presses curds through cloth, twisting them tight until whey drips into a clay bowl. You can hear it, a faint, rhythmic tap, tap, tap. The cheese will dry for days, maybe weeks, until it's tough enough to survive travel and neglect. You taste a piece, and it bites back, sharp, briny, unapologetic. This cheese was the worker's companion, the philosopher's snack, the soldier's comfort. It traveled in satchels across mountains and battlefields, softening only slightly in the heat. It paired with bread, olives, or nothing at all. You realize that Greek food was rarely about pleasure. It was about endurance disguised as tradition. But then there was honey, the one true sweetness of the ancient world. You see it glimmer in small clay jars, thick and golden, the only luxury nature offered freely. Bees were sacred, symbols of order and divine diligence. Honey flavored bread, soothed throats, and sweetened sacrifices. It was sunlight made edible. You dip a fingertip into the jar, and the taste fills your mouth, floral, deep, eternal. For most Greeks, honey was a dream. Expensive, scarce, and precious. Farmers might taste it once a year, maybe at a festival. The rest of the time, sweetness was imagination. Children licked empty jars just to remember what happiness felt like. You can almost see it, the small, sticky hands, the quiet smiles. In wealthier homes, honey dressed up everything. Cheese was soaked in it, figs glazed, barley cakes transformed into golden relics. These meals looked divine under lamplight, soft amber gleams, slow drips of syrup. But the illusion faded quickly. Beneath the sweetness, everything still tasted of smoke, salt, and need. You hear a philosopher joke that honey was proof the gods mocked humanity, showing them perfection, then rationing it. The others laugh, but it's a laughter tinged with hunger. Maybe he's right. In Greece, even pleasure carried a moral lesson. The smell of warm milk and herbs drifts through the air as the shepherd packs his cheeses into woven baskets. Bees hum nearby, lazy and content. The contrast feels almost cruel, how easily nature produced what humans struggled to preserve. You realize that Greek cuisine wasn't about invention, but adaptation. They learned to find comfort in what was available, not what was ideal. At dusk, the shepherd lights a small fire. He eats bread, cheese, and honey with his hands, staring at the mountains. The combination, sweet, salty, earthy, feels ancient and inevitable. You take a bite too, and for a moment it almost feels perfect, until you realize how rare that taste truly was. Soon, the stars appear, cold and steady. The last of the honey glows faintly in the jar beside you. You wonder how something so small could taste like heaven, and why, for the Greeks, heaven always came with a ration. The sound of sandals on gravel, the scrape of bronze armor, the dry wind carrying the smell of sweat, leather, and dust. You're marching with Greek soldiers now, hoplites, who know that hunger is a more reliable enemy than Persia. Their packs clink with metal cups, bread crusts and cheese that could double as a weapon. This is dinner on the move. There are no feasts in war, only calculations. Each man carries dried barley cakes, a flask of wine, and maybe olives if fortune smiled that morning. The bread is so hard they soak it in water before eating, though sometimes there's no time or water. You bite one piece, and it feels like chewing stone dust. The taste is bitter, the texture unforgiving. When they stop to rest, the smell of oil and sweat fills the air. A few light fires, though smoke risks discovery. Lentils and onions simmer in small pots, producing a smell halfway between nourishment and despair. Still, it's hot, and hot food is a kind of victory. You can almost hear the sighs of men pretending it tastes good. Wine is rationed, but sacred. They drink it from shared cups, each sip a reminder of home. The diluted liquid burns slightly in the throat, washing down the dryness of bread and fear. You realize wine wasn't escape, it was ritual. Something to hold on to when everything else was dust and discipline. At night, they eat under the stars, armor stacked beside them, hands trembling from exhaustion. Someone hums a song, slow, low, almost like prayer. The sound mingles with the faint crackle of the fire. You look at the pot again, the same stew they've eaten for weeks, and you understand. Repetition keeps the mind intact. The stomach learns what the soul resists. Sometimes, if fortune allows, they slaughter a goat or a bird. The smell of meat sends ripples through the camp, sudden joy, almost disbelief. For a brief moment, war feels like life again. But the meat is divided by rank, and the lower you stand, the less you taste. Fairness, it seems, didn't march with them. By dawn, the fires are out. The ashes mix with dust and footprints. The men eat cold bread and move on, their stomachs still half empty. The horizon is endless, the landscape unchanging, fields, rocks, silence. You feel the dryness on your tongue, the ache behind your eyes. Even the gods, you think, would skip breakfast here. War hardened their palates and their philosophy. Soldiers returned home craving not luxury, but simplicity, bread, wine, and peace. Maybe that's why Greek thinkers spoke so much about moderation. They'd seen what hunger could do to both body and mind. In the distance, smoke rises from another camp, another fire, another pot of lentils. You realize that the Greek diet wasn't just food, it was resilience. Every bite, every chew, every sip was an act of defiance against emptiness. As the army moves on, dust swallowing their footprints, you're left with silence and the faint smell of smoke that seems to linger centuries later. You exhale slowly and realize hunger built more of history than victory ever did. You wake to the sound of flutes echoing across the city. The streets of Athens shimmer with morning light, and garlands of ivy hang from doorways. It's a festival day, one of the few times the city smells like abundance. You catch the scent of roasted grain, honeyed cakes, and wine mixing in the air, each aroma clinging to the warm breeze like a promise. For most of the year, Greeks ate to endure. During festivals, they ate to remember why life was worth enduring. Tables filled the courtyards, and people brought whatever they could: bread, olives, maybe figs if fortune was kind. You see women carrying baskets of fruit to temples, children running barefoot, sticky with honey, their laughter cutting through the hum of prayers. The centerpiece of the celebration was the sacrifice, not just an act of worship, but a meal in disguise. When the priests finished their rituals, the meat was divided among the people. You can almost feel the energy shift, cheer replacing reverence. Smoke rose like incense, curling toward Olympus. The gods received the aroma, the mortals the chew. For a brief moment, class vanished. Rich or poor, everyone ate the same food under the same sky. The laughter sounded universal, the taste communal. You take a bite of charred lamb, its fat sizzling over coals, and you understand how religion softened the edge of hunger. For one day, life didn't taste like struggle, it tasted like gratitude. But the sweetness never lasted. Festivals ended quickly, and reality crept back like smoke through cracks. By morning, the city returned to its rhythm, grinding, boiling, scraping. You can almost hear the sigh of a mother folding away the last garland, whispering to her child that next year would be even better. Still, these feasts mattered. They weren't just indulgence, they were identity. To eat together was to belong to something larger, even if it was temporary. The Greeks believed that the gods attended in spirit, not to taste, but to watch humans remember joy. You look up at the temple steps. Children drop crumbs for Hermes, hoping for luck. The stone shines faintly under the afternoon sun, stained with wine from countless toasts. You realize that faith, in Greece, wasn't abstract, it was edible. It lived in the bread, the honey, the shared laughter after scarcity. As night falls, torches light the streets, flickering against marble walls. The smell of oil and smoke deepens. Someone begins singing a hymn that turns slowly into a drinking song. The gods, you think, wouldn't mind. They understood that mortals needed both prayer and appetite. When the fires fade and the last cup is emptied, the silence that follows feels heavy, like fullness after hunger. You rest your head against a cool column and listen to the city sleep. Even the crickets sound content tonight. You know it won't last, but for now, the world tastes kind. The room is quiet except for the faint scratch of a stylus against wax. The smell of parchment, oil lamps, and old wine fills the air. You're in the home of a philosopher, a man who believes wisdom should be tasted, not just spoken. His table is modest: bread, cheese, olives, water. He smiles, saying, "A wise man eats to live, not lives to eat." You nod politely, but your stomach disagrees. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, they all treated food as moral theatre. Eating simply meant discipline. To crave luxury was weakness. You imagine them debating the virtue of a lentil over a lavish feast, eyes shining with conviction while everyone quietly wishes for cake. The philosopher breaks his bread, dips it in oil, and chews slowly. He speaks of moderation, of balance, of how excess blinds the soul. You listen to his words and hear the echo of the land itself, dry, measured, enduring. Maybe the geography wrote the philosophy. When life gives you barley and vinegar, you invent stoicism. A student nearby nods reverently while sipping water mixed with wine. The smell of sour grapes fills the room. Philosophy, you realize, tastes like watered-down conviction. Yet there's something noble about it, the refusal to let pleasure control you. The Greeks feared indulgence the way sailors feared storms. Fascinating, but deadly. Still, not all thinkers agreed. Epicurus, the gentle rebel, believed pleasure wasn't evil, only misunderstood. He argued that a simple meal could bring happiness if eaten without fear or guilt. You can almost hear him say it. Give me bread and water, and I can rival Zeus in joy. You smile because he might be right if the bread was softer. Food for the Greeks became metaphor. A meal wasn't just sustenance, it was a mirror of the soul. The way you ate revealed who you were: restrained, greedy, generous, selfish. Even silence at the table carried moral weight. You could taste virtue, or its absence, in every bite. The conversation drifts from ethics to the cosmos, from olives to eternity. The air grows heavy with ideas and oil smoke. You feel your eyelids droop, lulled by the monotony of reason and the rhythm of chewing. Philosophy, it seems, makes excellent lullabies. In this quiet room, surrounded by slow thinkers and slower food, you understand the strange beauty of it all. The Greeks turned eating into art, not through flavor, but through meaning. Every crumb was symbolic, every sip philosophical. They didn't cook to please the tongue, they cooked to test the mind. By the time the discussion ends, the bread is gone, and the oil bowl is nearly empty. The philosopher wipes his hands on his tunic, smiles faintly, and says something about balance again. You're too tired to respond. Outside, The cicadas hum like tiny professors, repeating lessons you already know. You step into the night, the air cool and clean. The sky above Athens glows with starlight, steady, infinite, calm. You realize that for all their restraint, the Greeks were hungry in every sense. Hungry for wisdom, for beauty, for meaning, and sometimes for just a decent meal. Morning unfolds with the chatter of vendors echoing through narrow streets. You hear coins clinking, goats bleating, and the sharp calls of men selling vegetables that wilt faster than they can shout. The agora, the great marketplace, is alive. It smells like everything and nothing at once: fish, olives, smoke, sweat, figs, and faint despair. You breathe it in, and it almost feels like the pulse of Greece itself. The stalls overflow, but not with plenty, just with noise. You pass baskets of onions, jars of honey, wheels of cheese wrapped in leaves, and fish laid out on damp reed mats. The merchants argue constantly, each claiming divine superiority in their produce. "My olives are kissed by Apollo himself," one says, as flies confirm otherwise. You smile. Exaggeration, it seems, was the national spice. Some stalls sell herbs: thyme, mint, oregano, dried and crumbling in small bundles. Their smell cuts through the air like memory: sharp, green, clean. You imagine how a few leaves could transform an entire meal, if only briefly. A small miracle in an otherwise flavorless world. The fishmongers shout louder than everyone else. They slap the tables for attention, their hands slick with salt and scales. The ground beneath you glistens with water and guts. You watch a boy carry a bucket of small sardines, their silver bodies shimmering in the light. He looks proud, though his reward will likely be a crust of bread and a whiff of lunch. There's a section for wine too, though calling it section feels generous. Amphorae line the ground, sealed with clay and straw. Each carries its own scent, some rich, some sour, all potent. You take a sniff from one, and your eyes water instantly. The vendor grins proudly. "Good year," he says. You nod politely, certain he's lying. Among the chaos, philosophers mingle with beggars, and soldiers brush shoulders with slaves. Everyone needs to eat. Hunger was the one democracy Athens never abolished. The sounds blur into a rhythm, coins dropping, arguments rising, chickens flapping. You realize that the marketplace wasn't just commerce, it was theater, with survival as the script. Women walk by with clay jars balanced on their heads, their robes brushing against your knees. Children chase one another through puddles. The smell of fried dough returns, carried on the wind. For a moment, the air feels warmer, almost hopeful. Food, even bad food, still smelled like life. By midday, the market swells into chaos. The sun turns everything golden and unbearable. You squint through the brightness, watching as people pack their goods. Olive oil leaks onto the dirt, catching the light like spilled treasure. In a world without abundance, even waste gleams beautifully. As the crowd thins, you hear a faint song, a vendor humming to herself as she sweeps fish scales into the gutter. Her tune is soft, tired, content. You realize this is the true rhythm of Greek life, not the feasts or philosophies, but the quiet labor that filled the spaces between hunger and satisfaction. When you finally leave, the smell follows you home: vinegar, bread, oil, smoke. You carry it on your clothes like a story that refuses to end. And maybe that's the point, because in ancient Greece, food wasn't just nourishment, it was proof you were still here. You wake before sunrise, The fields stretch before you, uneven, stubborn, half green, half brown. Mist clings to the ground, and the air tastes faintly metallic, like dew and dust. Somewhere, a donkey brays and a plough creaks. This is where Greek food began, not in temples or markets, but in the quiet exhaustion of the countryside. A farmer bends over rows of barley, his tunic damp with sweat, though the sun hasn't yet risen. His hands are cracked, his nails blackened with soil. You can hear the slow rhythm of the hoe striking the earth, the faint rustle of grain whispering against the morning wind. The work looks endless, and it is. Farming in Greece wasn't a choice, it was penance. The rocky soil refused generosity, and rain came as rarely as mercy. Yet somehow, these people coaxed life from it. They built terraces into the hills, dug channels for water, and prayed to Demeter with the same desperation you'd reserve for breath. You realize that every loaf of bread in Greece was a small miracle born of sheer stubbornness. Lunch in the fields was simple: bread, olives, maybe a little cheese. The men sat under olive trees, their backs against the bark, sharing silence more than conversation. They dipped bread into oil and chewed slowly, their eyes fixed on the horizon. You taste the dust, the salt, the faint sweetness of fatigue. Sometimes, during harvest, songs filled the air, low, rhythmic chants to keep the body moving. Women gathered grain into baskets, their feet bare and caked with dirt. The sun climbed higher, and the smell of crushed grass and sweat became overwhelming. You can almost feel the heat on your shoulders, pressing like a slow hand. Evening brought brief relief. Fires flickered along the hills as families cooked simple stews, the scent of lentils and herbs drifting through the dark. Crickets began their chorus, blending with the crackle of firewood. The meal was modest but honest. They didn't eat to celebrate. They ate to recover. The gods had their share here too. Farmers left the first sheaf of barley in the field, a gift to Demeter. It swayed gently in the wind, golden against the deepening sky. You watch it and think about gratitude, the kind born not from abundance, but endurance. When winter came, the fields hardened. Men repaired tools, mended roofs, and waited. Food grew simpler still. Barley cakes, pickled vegetables, dried figs. Every bite carried memory, the echo of green fields and long days. You realize that in Greece, even flavor had seasons. At night, the stars looked closer than the next harvest. The air cooled, carrying the scent of olive wood smoke and distant sea. The farmers slept early, their bodies heavy, their dreams full of rain that might never come. You lie there too, staring at the sky, and understand. Greece was never generous, but it taught its people how to survive her indifference beautifully. By dawn, the first rooster crows. The fields breathe again, ready for another cycle of patience and faith. You rise with them, tasting the cool air, half hope, half habit. The work begins once more, and the world continues, slow and steady, just as it always has. The air feels heavy with warmth as you lean back on the couch, elbow pressed against a pillow, feet stretched lazily across woven cloth. A faint smell of olive oil drifts upward, mingling with smoke and sweat. You're not at a feast, just another quiet evening meal. The Greeks believed that to eat properly was to imitate the gods, though the gods, of course, never had to worry about crumbs. You can hear the soft clink of clay cups and the crackle of the small hearth nearby. Eating was never hurried. It was ceremony, rhythm, meditation. The bread rests on your palm, coarse and warm, and the moment feels deliberate, almost sacred. The Greeks believed that appetite was a mirror of virtue. How you ate revealed who you were. They reclined on one elbow while eating, a strange blend of luxury and discomfort. The posture was borrowed from the East and quickly became a symbol of refinement. You shift slightly, realizing how unnatural it feels. Still, there's something graceful about it, an illusion of power, even if your back protests after 10 minutes. You tear off a piece of bread, dip it into wine, and chew slowly. The texture is rough, the taste faintly bitter. Around you, conversation drifts like smoke, quiet, thoughtful, restrained. The Greeks believed moderation was beauty, even in hunger. You eat just enough to silence the body, but not enough to forget it exists. The body was sacred, yet constantly tested. Overeating dulled the mind, they said, while fasting purified it. So they walked a thin line between indulgence and denial, tasting pleasure without surrendering to it. You wonder how they managed it, how they measured their joy so precisely. After the meal, someone brings a bronze basin of water. You rinse your hands, watching the dirt and oil swirl into small galaxies before vanishing. Cleanliness was a daily rebirth. The Greeks washed not just for hygiene, but to reset the spirit. You feel lighter as the cool water drips down your wrists. Oil was rubbed into the skin afterward, thick, fragrant, protective. You imagine the sensation. Slick warmth under your palms, the faint herbal scent of thyme and myrtle. They believed that oil sealed the body against decay, that it preserved vitality itself. To be oiled was to be alive, glimmering under firelight like marble come to life. You look around the room. The hearth burns low and shadows stretch along the walls. The meal is over, yet no one rushes to leave. There's a shared silence, almost devotional. The act of eating feels complete, not because of fullness, but because of stillness. The Greeks treated food as philosophy in motion. Every bite required thought, every sip restraint. To eat mindlessly was barbaric. To eat consciously was divine. You take another small piece of bread, if only to feel the weight of that idea again. Outside, crickets begin their nightly hum. The air grows cooler, brushing against your neck. You realize that in this world, eating wasn't a distraction from life. It was life itself, translated into texture, sound, and breath. You chew slowly, grateful for the repetition. As you finish, you wipe your fingers on cloth and exhale softly. The faint aroma of oil lingers in the air, mixing with smoke and sleepiness. You feel your body settle into calm balance, neither hungry nor heavy, just steady. Maybe that was the Greek secret all along. Not satisfaction, but peace. The fire fades, and silence takes over. You lie back fully now, eyes half closed, feeling the weight of the day slip away. In the stillness, even digestion becomes a kind of meditation, a quiet hymn between the mortal and the divine. The morning is blue-grey, still and smoky. You step into the kitchen, and it breathes like a living thing. The hearth glows softly in the corner, its flames sighing against clay walls blackened by years of soot. The air smells of barley, ash, and faint sweetness. Somewhere a pot bubbles, whispering in rhythm with a woman's quiet humming. Greek kitchens belong to women, though no one wrote their names. History remembers the philosophers, not the hands that fed them. But here, before dawn, you see life begin. A woman kneads dough with slow patience, her palms pressing rhythm into silence. The texture of the flour is rough, sticking to her skin like fine dust. Every motion carries intention. The Greeks had no recipes, only memory. Each dish is made by instinct, how the dough feels, how the smoke smells, how the sound of boiling changes when lentils soften. You can almost hear it, the quiet conversation between experience and flame. The air thickens with smoke, and your eyes sting lightly. There's no chimney, just a hole in the roof where thin beams of light pierce through the haze. Dust dances in them, golden and alive. You realize the kitchen isn't just a room. It's an entire world, self-contained, sacred in its repetition. She stirs the pot, leans close, tastes from a wooden spoon. Her face doesn't change. The flavor doesn't matter much. It only needs to feed. Survival, not pleasure, is the goal. Yet her expression holds something peaceful. The act itself is its own kind of beauty. Outside, roosters call and sandals scuff against stone. The city begins to wake, but in here, time moves slower. The rhythm of the fire never falters. You can hear the crackle of wood, the low bubble of stew, the occasional hiss of oil touching flame. It's music for the weary. When she finishes, she wipes her hands on her apron, leaving white streaks of flour. She turns to the table and lays out bowls, bread, olives, water. The smell of roasted grain fills the room, sharp and comforting. This is the smell of stability, the quiet heartbeat of a household. Another woman enters, carrying a jug of water. They share a brief smile, no words needed. Work is shared without complaint, conversation replaced by rhythm. One tends the pot while the other fans the fire. Together, they sustain the invisible world that men later claimed to build. Sometimes, between tasks, one hums a song to Hestia, goddess of the hearth. The tune is soft and low, meant for no ears but the fire's. The smoke swirls upward like prayer. You realize that every meal in Greece began with worship, even if no one called it that. By mid-morning, the room is warm, fragrant, alive. A loaf bakes on a flat stone, its crust darkening fast. The women watch, waiting for that precise second before it burns. They move with instinct, not instruction. You watch too, feeling the hypnotic calm of their certainty. When the food is ready, they sit for a moment on low stools, wiping sweat from their faces. Outside, the city buzzes. Inside, the world feels complete. They eat first, quietly, before serving others. A small rebellion, hidden inside routine. The fire crackles softer now, content and low. Smoke drifts lazily through the air, carrying the scent of bread and time. You close your eyes, listening to the slow breath of the kitchen. It feels eternal, as if the same flame has burned here for 1,000 years, and maybe it has. The lamps glow low, turning the room into a pool of amber light. The air is thick with wine and whispers, perfume and expectation. You hear the soft pluck of a lyre and the faint laughter of people reclining too close together. Tonight, the Greeks dine not for hunger, but for desire. Every candle flicker feels like a heartbeat. You recline on a couch, fingers tracing the rim of your cup. The wine smells sharp and sweet, thick with resin, touched with the sea. When you drink, it burns slightly before softening into warmth that spreads through your chest. This isn't just drinking, it's an invocation. Dionysus hovers somewhere near, invisible, amused. Plates of fruit and honeyed cakes rest between guests. Figs split open under gentle fingers, their insides glistening like tiny suns. Someone laughs softly, Someone else sighs. The Greeks didn't separate pleasure from sanctity. They believed the divine hid inside the body's most human hungers. You take a piece of cheese soaked in honey, its surface golden, its scent faintly floral. The first bite melts into salt and sweetness. A woman beside you hums a tune, low and slow, her voice blending with the rustle of robes. You realize desire was never loud in Greece. It was ritual, rhythm, poetry, whispered through touch. The air grows warmer as the night deepens. Someone begins to dance, barefoot, graceful, moving with the tempo of the lyre. Her anklets jingle softly, and for a moment, time seems to stop. You can almost smell the bronze on her skin, the faint shimmer of oil as her arms glide through the air. Wine spills, laughter follows, and no one apologizes. The Greeks believed in the beauty of excess, but only for a night. Tomorrow, they'd wake to restraint again, pretending nothing divine had touched them. You admire that balance, their ability to indulge completely, then let go without regret. You watch two lovers sharing a pomegranate, the seeds glowing like rubies in their palms. They feed each other slowly, eyes half closed, the fruit's juice staining their lips. Love, like wine, always left its mark. You can almost taste its bitterness hiding beneath the sweetness. The poets call this symposium of hearts, but it feels simpler than that. It's just people being honest for once, hungry, laughing, unguarded. For a few hours, the walls between souls dissolve like salt in warm water. You breathe deeply, letting the warmth sink into you. As the night grows quiet, the music fades to a hum. Candles flicker lower, and the room smells of oil, sweat, and fading sweetness. You feel full, not from food, but from nearness. There's a peace in the exhaustion of pleasure, like the stillness after rain. Someone quotes a poet, "All that is sweet is brief." You don't remember who. It doesn't matter. The words fit perfectly between the silence and the heartbeat of the fire. You sip the last of your wine and taste the truth. Outside, the sky is black velvet, stars blinking like forgotten embers. You step out, air cool against your skin, and listen to the distant sea. The Greeks believed love was madness granted by the gods, but tonight it feels gentler, like surrender after too much thought. You close your eyes and breathe. The smell of wine still clings to your hands. Tomorrow, life will return to barley and smoke, but for now, you let the sweetness linger. Not forever, just long enough to remember it was real. The marketplace is quieter tonight, its usual clamor replaced by murmurs. You walk past stalls selling herbs bundled in string, rosemary, thyme, garlic, mint. The air is thick with scent, both medicinal and mystical. Every smell feels like it carries a story, a secret, a warning. A woman in a dark shawl sells charms made of salt and bone. Her hands are rough, her eyes sharp. She tells you that food without prayer attracts envy, that vinegar can chase away evil, and that garlic keeps spirits at bay. You smile, unsure if she means ghosts or neighbors. Garlic, sharp and pure, dangles from doorways. The smell is everywhere, piercing, cleansing. People believe it wards off misfortune and jealousy, as if its scent could intimidate invisible forces. You crush a clove between your fingers, and the oil burns slightly on your skin. It feels alive, stubborn, protective. The Greeks saw no line between food and faith. Everything eaten carried meaning. Honey brought favor. Salt sealed truth. Onions cleansed the body and the soul. You realize that superstition was their way of flavoring life when ingredients were few. Belief filled the gaps that hunger left open. In one corner, an old man mixes herbs into wine, muttering as he stirs. He claims it cures sorrow, though the smell alone could drown a bad memory. People sip it cautiously, half for comfort, half for hope. The mind, after all, can be convinced of anything when desperate enough. You pass a shrine to Hecate, goddess of crossroads and shadows. Offerings rest at its base: eggs, fish, garlic, bread. The smell is potent, the air humming with devotion. Even fear smells different when sanctified. The Greeks didn't avoid darkness, they fed it carefully, one crumb at a time. Some superstitions were kind. Mothers baked cakes in odd numbers to confuse bad spirits, or placed knives across loaves so envy couldn't cut through the home. Others were crueler, curses whispered into food, hexes baked into dough. You imagine biting into vengeance sweetened with honey. Food was protection, but also weapon. A meal could heal or harm depending on the heart behind it. The Greeks knew that nourishment came with risk. To accept someone's bread was to trust their soul. You feel a quiet shiver at that thought. At night, when the market empties, the smell of herbs lingers in the air like a promise. You hear faint prayers carried by the wind, half gratitude, half fear. The world feels charged, alive, balanced on the edge between blessing and curse. A woman locks her door and leaves a small bowl of milk outside for wandering spirits. The moon reflects in the liquid, pale and still. Somewhere in the distance, a dog howls once, then stops. The silence that follows feels ancient. You breathe deeply, catching the ghost of garlic and rosemary. It's strange how fear can comfort when ritual gives it shape. The Greeks understood that too, that even in a world ruled by gods, mortals still needed small protections, edible prayers against the unknown. You walk home slowly, past shuttered windows and flickering lamps. The air cools, the smells fade, and you realize that in Greece, food never just fed the body, it fed belief. And belief, when hungry, could devour anything. Morning arrives slowly, heavy with the smell of yesterday's stew. The pot still sits by the hearth, a crust forming on its surface. You stir it gently, and the smell deepens: lentils, smoke, and something faintly sour. In Greece, leftovers weren't waste, they were memory, flavor that refused to die quietly. The Greeks rarely threw food away. What wasn't eaten today became the foundation of tomorrow. Bread hardened overnight was soaked in wine or oil, stew thickened into paste, and even ashes from the fire might flavor dough. You can almost hear the wisdom in it. Nothing lost, everything transformed. A woman kneels beside the hearth, scraping the pot with a wooden spoon. The sound is rhythmic, comforting. The leftover stew slides free, darker now, richer somehow. She adds water, a few herbs, a prayer under her breath. Hunger didn't demand perfection, it demanded continuity. The smell fills the small room again, thicker this time, familiar. You realize that food in Greece wasn't about novelty. It was about repetition, about finding peace in sameness. Each bite carried the echo of yesterday, and that predictability became its own form of safety. Children sit cross-legged, waiting quietly. They know the taste already, but that doesn't matter. The stew tastes like home, like survival. You watch them eat, their faces calm, unbothered by monotony. To them, flavor is less important than warmth. When the bowls are empty, the woman scrapes the pot again. A thin layer of lentils clings to the bottom, burnt but fragrant. She smiles faintly. Those last bits, the ones most people ignore, hold the truest taste. Bitterness, smoke and satisfaction woven together. In the fields, farmers eat the same way. Bread from the night before, oil pressed last season, olives too soft to sell. Each meal a small conversation with time. You've taken much, but not everything. You can almost feel that quiet defiance in every chew. Philosophers wrote about virtue and restraint, but the real philosophers were here, people who found grace in what remained. A pot reheated too many times became a symbol of persistence, the culinary equivalent of prayer. You taste that philosophy in every mouthful. At dusk, the pot is washed and left upside down by the fire. The soot stains it permanently, a dark halo of all the meals that came before. Tomorrow, it will hold the same stew again, slightly changed, slightly older, still alive. There's something poetic in that. The Greeks didn't believe in abundance, they believed in cycles. In a world where food came hard and slow, the act of keeping a flavor alive was rebellion against decay. As the night cools, you sit by the empty pot. It smells faintly of smoke and thyme. You close your eyes and breathe it in, realizing that life, like stew, tastes richer the second day, when you've had time to understand it. The fire cracks softly, and the air hums with calm. You think of all the unseen meals across centuries, shared by hands like these, in rooms like this. Greece, you realize, was built not on marble, but on leftovers and patience. The air is heavy with incense and quiet voices. You stand beside a procession moving slowly down a dusty road. Mourners wear dark robes, their faces pale in the morning light. Ahead of them, baskets of bread and honey glisten, carried like offerings. The scent of sweetness floats through the air, soft and somber. In ancient Greece, food followed life even beyond it. The dead were fed just as the living were, bread for the journey, wine for the road, honey for peace. The offerings lay beside the body, each bite symbolic, each aroma a prayer. You can almost smell the sorrow baked into the lobes. Barley played the leading role, as it always did. It was sprinkled over graves, ground into cakes, or mixed into broth for mourners to share. Barley meant renewal, something planted, something reborn. You watch a mother scatter handfuls into the soil, her expression calm. Grief here is ritualized, precise, almost graceful. After burial, the family gathers for the perideipnon, the funeral meal. No celebration, no laughter, just quiet eating. The stew is simple, the bread plain. Every taste is deliberate, as if chewing too quickly would insult the silence. The room smells of lentils and candle smoke. Wine is passed around sparingly. No toasts, no joy, only small sips, each one heavy with remembrance. The liquid tastes of iron and ash, yet it warms the throat. You realize this is how humans endure the unendurable, one swallow at a time. The Greeks believed the dead could taste through scent, so they burned food near graves, letting the smoke rise as nourishment for souls. The smell of meat, herbs, and honey filled the air, blending with salt from tears. You can almost feel those two worlds brushing against each other, one visible, one only imagined. At dusk, the fires fade. The offerings remain, bread darkening under moonlight, honey shimmering faintly, oil soaking into the earth. It's beautiful and tragic, this idea that death, too, must eat. The Greeks gave their dead what they denied themselves, Plenty, peace, and flavor. You walk home with the mourners, the road quiet except for the soft crunch of sand beneath sandals. No one speaks. The silence feels full, like the pause between breaths. Somewhere far away, a dog barks, then stops. In the house, the family lights a new lamp. They leave a small bowl of grain on the windowsill so the spirit won't go hungry on its first night away. The flame flickers softly, the smell of oil faint and comforting. For 9 days, they'll bring offerings, bread, figs, wine, and then stop. The dead will have crossed the river, full enough for the journey. You think of the kindness in that, feeding grief rather than fighting it. The air grows cooler, and the crickets begin their hymn. You close your eyes and smell the faint traces of honey and smoke. Death, you realize, was never separation to the Greeks. It was simply another meal, one last course shared quietly with eternity. You breathe out slowly, the sound mingling with the night wind. The flame trembles once and steadies again, and for a moment, even loss tastes gentle. The room is quiet now. The fire that cooked dinner has softened into a nest of glowing embers. You sit close to it, feeling the faint warmth on your palms. The smell of smoke lingers, sweet, earthy, gentle, around you. The walls breathe faintly in the heat, and the house feels smaller, safer, alive. You can hear the faint crackle of wood, the sigh of a pot cooling beside the coals. Somewhere outside, an owl calls once, then fades. In Greece, the night belonged to stillness. This was the hour when hunger, noise, and thought were finally allowed to rest. Families gathered close to the hearth not to eat, but to exist quietly together. The same place that had boiled lentils and baked bread now became a soft light for dreams. Children pressed their backs against warm stones, half asleep, their fingers smelling of olive oil and soot. You can almost feel the air, thick with peace. The goddess Hestia was believed to dwell inside the flame. She didn't demand temples or riches, only that the hearth never went cold. Every Greek home kept her spirit alive through the simple act of keeping fire. You realize this was more than warmth, it was continuity, a reminder that even in darkness, light had work to do. The night hearth glowed like a heartbeat. Breadcrumbs and spilled wine glimmered faintly in its light, traces of life too ordinary to be noticed in daylight. The Greeks didn't fear imperfection, they honored it quietly. Every crack in the pottery, every stain on the table was proof that life had passed through. You sit still, the silence broken only by the soft collapse of a log. Sparks leap up, tiny constellations in the dim air. They vanish quickly, leaving behind the faint smell of pine. You watch them go, and it feels like watching thoughts fade before sleep. Bright, brief, harmless. The air cools. You wrap a cloth over your shoulders, its texture coarse but comforting. In this dim light, everything loses its edge. Even hunger feels distant now, replaced by that pleasant heaviness that comes before dreams. You close your eyes for a moment and listen. A dog shifting outside, the low hum of the sea far away, the whisper of fire breathing. Greece after dark was a lullaby, the sound of survival softening into quiet gratitude. Someone adds a log and the flame brightens, washing the room in amber. Faces flicker briefly, tired, calm, content. This was the truest luxury of all, to sit full enough, warm enough, safe enough. The gods had ambrosia. Mortals had this. You rest your head against the wall. The warmth seeps through fabric, bone, thought. Every smell, the bread, the smoke, the faint salt of sweat, melts into one steady note. It's the scent of living simply, and that simplicity feels divine. Outside, the stars begin their slow drift over the roof. Inside, the fire breathes slower, its glow soft as a sigh. You understand now why the Greeks called Hestia the quiet heart of the world. She never roared, she endured. You breathe deeply, eyelids heavy, and for a fleeting moment you think that maybe peace is just this: warmth, silence, and the smell of smoke that asks for nothing in return. You wake to the hush of waves, the sea stretches wide and silver beneath the moon, and the air tastes faintly of salt and cool wind. Somewhere nearby, a fishing net drips quietly, releasing water back to the sand. The Greeks owed their food, their gods, and their patience to this endless blue. The sea fed them, but never kindly. Sailors rose before dawn, their breath fogging in the cold, their boats creaking under nets. You can hear it, the soft slap of water against wood, the rhythmic pull of oars. Each catch was a negotiation with chaos, a prayer disguised as labor. When they returned, their hair stiff with salt, the women weighted with fire and oil. The smell of frying fish filled the air, sharp and bright, like a celebration that dared to be brief. The sea gave food, but it also took sons. Every meal tasted faintly of gratitude and grief. You walk along the shore and see baskets of small silver fish gleaming under moonlight. The sand is damp, dotted with shells that crunch softly beneath your steps. The air hums with quiet life, crickets inland, waves beyond, and a sky so vast it almost swallows thought. In coastal villages, nights smelled of smoke and salt. Oil lamps flickered in doorways as people cleaned their nets, their hands slick with sea and fatigue. Dinner was always the same: fish, bread, wine, silence. Yet no one complained. Familiarity, not flavor, was comfort. The Greeks worshipped Poseidon with both fear and fondness. He was unpredictable, like hunger itself, sometimes generous, sometimes cruel. Sailors left offerings of bread and oil before voyages, knowing that survival depended more on mood than skill. You can feel that humility even now in the soft crash of the tide. Sometimes, after storms, families walked the shore searching for driftwood or stranded fish. The beach smelled of decay and renewal, salt, seaweed, life reshaped. You imagine bending down to pick up a broken oar, still wet from faraway waters, wondering what stories it carried. When the sea was kind, markets filled with sound, shouts, laughter, the clang of knives against scales. Fish were grilled over open fires, oil sizzling loudly, flames reflecting in wide eyes. People ate quickly, joyfully, as if afraid the sea might change its mind. At night, everything slowed again. The boats swayed softly in the harbor, their ropes creaking like lullabies. The smell of brine lingered in the air, faint but constant. It was the scent of dependence, the reminder that life, for all its effort, still floated on something larger. You sit on a rock near the shore, the spray cool against your skin. The moonlight makes the water look like liquid glass. You can hear your own breathing mixing with the rhythm of waves, steady, unbroken. The sea doesn't rest, but it teaches restfulness. The Greeks often said that sleep was the brother of death and the child of night. But here, it feels more like the child of the sea, gentle, repetitive, eternal. The waves whisper the same story over and over, and somehow it never gets old. You close your eyes. The sound of the tide becomes a heartbeat. The salt in the air settles on your lips. Somewhere, far out, a fisherman hums a song you'll never hear clearly, but you feel its rhythm. It's the rhythm of survival. And now, at last, you drift. The sun has long vanished behind the hills, leaving the world painted in shades of blue and silver. You sit beside a low wall of stone, the night wind brushing softly through the olive trees. The air smells of cool earth and old firewood. Everything is still, so still that even your thoughts begin to whisper slower. Simplicity was the Greek dream. They built philosophies around it, prayed for it, sang to it. The body needed little, they said: bread, water, rest. Anything beyond that belonged to pride. You watch the stars blink awake one by one and wonder how many centuries have passed under this same sky, asking for less and finding peace in it. The houses around you glow faintly through narrow windows. You can smell oil lamps burning inside, mixed with the faintest trace of stew reheated from earlier. Someone laughs softly, someone coughs, someone prays. The sounds blend into a lullaby of ordinary life. Simplicity wasn't poverty, it was freedom from needing more. A piece of bread dipped in oil could mean satisfaction if eaten slowly enough. You remember how the Greeks said moderation wasn't denial, but mastery. To control desire was to conquer chaos. You think of the farmers asleep in their fields, of women sweeping crumbs from tables, of children breathing steadily beside the fire. All of them kept the same quiet promise: to make do, to find rhythm, to live well in the narrow space between hunger and abundance. The smell of time drifts through the night, faint and familiar. The stars above seem close enough to touch, their cold light gentle on your skin. You realize the Greeks didn't seek comfort in having, they found it in noticing. Every breeze, every bite, every silence had meaning. Even the animals rest now. A dog sighs in its sleep, a goat shifts on its rope. You can almost hear the pulse of the earth beneath you, slow and steady. It feels ancient, forgiving. In moments like this, you understand why their gods were carved from both stone and wind. Permanent, yet soft. You take a sip of wine from a clay cup. It's watered down, as tradition demands, but it tastes richer somehow, aged by the quiet. Each swallow reminds you that simplicity isn't absence, it's depth. The less you reach for, the more you feel. A lamp flickers in the distance, then fades. The night deepens into something vast and kind. The world feels weightless here, held only by sound and scent. You breathe slowly, filling your lungs with air that smells faintly of olives and smoke. In your mind, you hear the words of an old philosopher. Happiness depends on ourselves. It sounds truer now than ever. Not a command, just an observation whispered to the dark. You stretch your legs, feeling the ground cool beneath your feet. The stones are rough, the air light. You close your eyes and let the silence settle into your chest. You feel small, but not insignificant. Small like a seed that still remembers the soil. Above you, the constellations shift gently. The night is ancient, endless, patient. You smile faintly, thinking how simplicity has always been misunderstood. It was never about having little. It was about needing only what you already have. The morning never truly begins here. It just glows softly into being. A faint gold light slides over the hills, catching on the edges of roofs and fields. The smell of bread returns, as it always does. Somewhere, a pot begins to bubble again. Greece wakes in loops, not lines. You walk through the quiet street. A cat stretches on a wall, indifferent. The stones beneath your sandals are still cool, the air gentle. It feels like the world is exhaling after a long dream. Everything you've seen, the markets, the feasts, the fields, all merge into this still moment of beginning again. You pass a doorway where an old man sits, tearing bread into small pieces for the birds. His hands move slowly, deliberately. He looks up and nods, as if you've both agreed on something unspoken. Maybe that life, for all its hungers, has been generous enough. The Greeks often said the table was eternal, that as long as bread, oil, and wine existed, civilization would endure. You can see why. The table wasn't just furniture. It was the meeting place of gods and mortals, hunger and hope. You feel it even now, that invisible line between need and gratitude. A woman appears with a jug of water balanced on her shoulder. The light glints off it, turning it into gold for just a second. She sets it down beside the hearth, and the sound of pouring water fills the air, soft, endless. You realize that Greece survived through rhythm, not excess, through habit, not miracle. You remember every meal you've seen on this journey, every stew, every loaf, every drop of oil that glimmered like treasure.
None of it was grand, yet all of it felt sacred. The Greeks didn't need feasts to celebrate. They celebrated endurance itself. The smell of baking bread deepens. A child laughs somewhere beyond the wall. A rooster calls. It's the same song the earth has sung since before memory. You feel its pulse through your feet, timeless, steady, forgiving. The table is set again, bread, cheese, olives, and silence. The same ingredients, different hearts.
You sit, not as guest or stranger, but as part of something circular and complete. The first bite tastes familiar, like déjà vu written in flavor. Around you, life unfolds quietly. Bees hum near the window. The air warms slightly. The bread cools. You realize that nothing extraordinary ever happens here, and that's exactly why it's beautiful. The absence of drama becomes its own kind of peace. The Greeks believed that after death, the soul feasted forever in the Elysian fields. But perhaps eternity is simpler than that. Perhaps it's this table, this bread, this morning light repeating without end. You take one final breath, filling your lungs with smoke, salt, and sunlight. The world feels whole. You think of all who came before, farmers, cooks, sailors, philosophers, and how every one of them once sat at a table like this. The same hunger, the same grace. The wind moves softly through the open window. You close your eyes, feeling it brush your face. The air smells faintly of wheat and warm stone. And then, without effort, your mind drifts downward, slower, quieter, towards sleep. The fire has gone out. Only a faint trail of smoke curls upward, carrying with it the last scent of barley and ash. The house is silent now, walls cooling, the night heavy with calm. You sit alone for a moment longer, feeling the slow rhythm of your own breath. Everything you've seen, every meal, every voice, lingers here, folded softly into the dark. Somewhere beyond the hills, the sea murmurs. Its sound is the same one that lulled the Greeks to sleep thousands of years ago, a sound older than language and gentler than thought. You breathe with it, slow and steady, until even your heartbeat feels like part of the tide. You think of them, the farmers, the philosophers, the women stirring pots before dawn, the sailors whispering prayers into waves. Their lives were brief, their meals simple, but their patience infinite. They never conquered hunger. They befriended it. Olive oil, bread, wine, smoke. 4 flavors that carried a civilization. Nothing extravagant, nothing wasted. Just enough to remind them that the body is temporary and the spirit always curious. You realize that history isn't written in temples or wars, it's written in kitchens, on fingertips, in the smell of meals that no one remembered to record. The gods of Greece have long fallen silent, their temples turned to stone and shadow. But the hearth still burns, in every small act of survival, every shared meal, every quiet gratitude whispered before eating. Maybe that's all the divine ever wanted, to be remembered through warmth. The stars above are steady now, patient and indifferent. You watch them for a while, eyes heavy, their light flickering like reflections on a bowl of wine. Somewhere in that endless sky, the same constellations once guided fishermen home, philosophers through thought, dreamers toward peace. The wind moves gently through the olive branches outside, their leaves rustling like a lullaby. It smells of salt and soil and time. You close your eyes, letting it brush across your face, cool and slow. Everything feels softer now, the air, the ground, the memories. In your mind, the taste of Greece lingers, not bitter, not sweet, just honest. Smoke, oil, grain, and patience. The kind of flavor that doesn't fade when the tongue forgets it, only when the heart stops listening. You inhale one last time, long and deep, drawing in the scent of the fire that once was. The world around you hums quietly, the night folding itself into rest. Every sound becomes distant, the whisper of wind, the pulse of the earth, the faint creak of wood. Sleep waits at the edges, patient, inevitable. You feel it touch your thoughts like fingertips dipping into water. The body surrenders. The breath slows. The ancient world dissolves into quiet. And as you drift, you realize something simple. Hunger ends, fire fades, empires crumble, but peace, the kind born from enoughness, survives every age. So you let go, slowly, softly, into the quiet aftertaste of time.